What if I told you that 10 European countries are on the brink of collapse, not someday soon? Some of these names will shock you. Others, you'll see the warning signs and wonder how we missed them. But here's the twist: what's happening in Europe could ripple across the globe, including your backyard. So, who's on the list, and which country might fall first? I'm George Galloway from Insydreport. Let's find out. What if I told you that Europe's strongest economy, Germany, the industrial titan, the economic backbone of an entire continent, is now facing a crisis so deep it might not survive the next 2 years? Sounds unthinkable, doesn't it? But history has shown us one thing: no empire, no matter how mighty, is invincible. And Germany's unraveling might just be the shock that breaks Europe. For decades, Germany was the model of efficiency, the Mercedes of nations, well-oiled, fast, and reliable. Its economy thrived on exports, precision engineering, and a disciplined workforce. But here's the problem: when you're built to perfection, even the smallest cracks can bring the entire machine to a halt. And Germany's cracks? They're not small anymore. Let's start with the population. Germany is aging fast. By 2035, over 40% of its population will be over the age of 50. Think about it: more retirees drawing from the system, fewer workers contributing to it. But then there's the kicker: it's not just the numbers, it's the type of jobs disappearing. Young Germans are turning away from traditional trades, plumbing, manufacturing, engineering. The industries that built Germany are being left behind. And therefore, the labor force is shrinking. By 2025, experts predict there could be a shortfall of over 3 million skilled workers. Now, here's where it gets messy. Germany's economy isn't just built on what it produces, it's built on who buys it. For years, China and Russia were its biggest customers, but the world's shifting and those ties, they're breaking. Sanctions on Russia have cut off a key trading partner, and tensions between the West and China, that's choking the flow of German exports like cars, machinery, and chemicals. But wait, it gets worse. Energy. Germany relied heavily on Russian natural gas, importing over 50% of its supply from Moscow. When the Ukraine war broke out, that pipeline shut down. And therefore, energy costs have skyrocketed. By 2023, prices were up 50%. Entire industries, automotive, steel, even food production, are struggling to stay afloat. Imagine this: a German bakery open for 40 years suddenly closing its doors. Not because it ran out of flour or workers, but because the ovens were too expensive to run. That's the reality Germany is facing today. If rising energy costs weren't bad enough, inflation has hit German households like a freight train. At 7.2% in 2023, prices for basics, bread, rent, gas are climbing faster than wages. But inflation isn't just about money, it's about trust. When people can't afford their lives, they lose faith in their leaders. And in Germany, protests are starting to boil over. Picture this: crowds of angry citizens filling the streets of Berlin, holding signs that read "Warm homes, not warmongers." Young people demanding jobs, families asking why they can't make ends meet in one of the wealthiest countries on earth. And here's the kicker: it's not just the people turning against the system. Businesses are losing confidence too. In 2023 alone, over 200 small and medium-sized enterprises declared bankruptcy every week. These aren't faceless corporations, these are family-run operations, restaurants, shops, manufacturers closing their doors for good. And let's talk about energy again, because this is where things get downright scary. Germany didn't just rely on Russian gas for heat, it relied on it for its identity. Manufacturing, the backbone of Germany's economy, runs on energy. Without cheap gas, factories can't produce at competitive rates. Global customers are already looking elsewhere: China, India, even the US. But here's the twist: renewable energy could save Germany, right? Solar, wind, and hydro. The problem is, they're not ready. The transition to green energy has been slow, underfunded, and tangled in bureaucracy. By the time Germany catches up, it might be too late. And therefore, Germany is facing a cascade of crises: aging population, shrinking workforce, failing exports, rising inflation, and an energy crisis with no clear solution. Each of these issues feeds into the next, creating a feedback loop of decline. The more businesses close, the fewer jobs there are. The fewer jobs, the less tax revenue for the government. And without that revenue, Infrastructure crumbles, social programs disappear, the safety net breaks. So here's the question: what happens when the strongest pillar in Europe begins to wobble? What happens to the rest of the structure? Could this be the end of Germany as we know it? Germany has always been the nation others leaned on during the Eurozone crisis, during the global recession, during the pandemic. But now Germany is the one that needs help. And here's the scary part: if Germany falls, it won't just take Europe with it. It could trigger a global economic shockwave. Imagine American companies reliant on German parts shutting down production. Imagine European banks collapsing under the weight of failed German loans. And therefore, the world economy, already fragile, could face a collapse unlike anything we've seen in decades. The question is, can it step back from the brink, or are we watching history repeat itself one broken empire at a time? What if the future of Japan, the land of innovation, samaras, and cherry blossoms, isn't a rising sun, but a slow and quiet descent into the shadows? The truth is, Japan's biggest battle isn't against an enemy you can see, it's against time itself. For decades, Japan stood as a beacon of progress, technological advancements, a strong economy, and a culture admired worldwide. But beneath the surface lies a demographic time bomb. Japan's population is shrinking faster than almost any other country on Earth. By 2023, the nation had lost over 500,000 people annually. And here's the twist: this isn't just about fewer babies, it's about the aging population left behind. Today, nearly 30% of Japanese citizens are over the age of 65, the highest proportion of elderly in the world. Imagine an entire country where retirement homes outnumber schools. But it doesn't stop there. Fewer young people mean fewer workers. And fewer workers mean an economy that's grinding to a halt. Japan's GDP growth has stagnated for years, and with every passing month, the cracks are widening. Now, here's something most people don't see: Japan isn't just shrinking, it's hollowing out. Major cities like Tokyo and Osaka are thriving hubs of activity, but travel just a few miles into the countryside, and you'll find entire villages abandoned. Empty homes, overgrown fields, towns where the youngest resident is 70 years old. It's a haunting sight, a modern nation slipping into a ghostly silence. And therefore, businesses are leaving these rural areas in droves. Schools are closing. Hospitals can't stay open without patients. It's a domino effect that no one seems able to stop. But let's talk about money. Japan's economy isn't just struggling, it's stuck. Decades of deflation, a phenomenon where prices keep falling, have left the nation in a cycle of economic stagnation. And therefore, wages haven't risen in years. Young people can't afford homes, let alone families. And businesses hesitant to invest are treading water instead of expanding. Even Japan's once mighty tech sector is falling behind. Global competitors from South Korea, China, and the US are outpacing Japan in areas like AI, renewable energy, and even robotics, the very field Japan pioneered. But there's another layer to this story: culture. Japan's traditions, rooted in respect and hierarchy, have created a society slow to adapt. But here's the conflict: in a world moving at lightning speed, Japan's resistance to change could be its greatest weakness. From outdated gender roles to rigid corporate structures, the country is struggling to evolve. So here's the question: is Japan destined to fade quietly, a nation slipping into irrelevance? Or will this land of resilience rise to defy the odds? What if the country known for its art, romance, and revolutions is teetering on the edge of its greatest collapse yet? France is facing a perfect storm, and no one is safe from the fallout. Let's start with the numbers. France's debt to GDP ratio hit 115% in 2023. That means the nation owes more money than its economy can produce in an entire year. But here's the kicker: every day, that number grows. Every euro spent to pay the debt is one less euro for education, healthcare, or infrastructure. And therefore, public services are crumbling, roads remain unrepaired, hospitals are understaffed, schools are closing in rural areas. It's like a slow poison eating away at the very foundations of the republic. Inflation has made things worse. By late 2023, it 5.6%, which might not sound terrifying until you realize wages haven't kept up. Families are struggling to afford food, energy, and basic necessities. But here's the twist: the rich are getting richer while the working class is left behind. The divide is sparking outrage, and the streets are where this frustration explodes. France is no stranger to protests, but 2023 was a record year with over 300 demonstrations. From pension reforms to rising living costs, the anger in the streets is palpable. But this isn't just about protests, it's about a nation losing faith in its leaders. Politicians seem paralyzed, unable to deliver solutions, and therefore trust in government has plummeted. As protests intensify, cities like Paris, Lyon, and Marseille are turning into battlegrounds. Businesses shut their doors. Tourism, one of France's economic lifelines, is declining, scared off by images of burning cars and riot police. And then there's nature. Flooding has ravaged entire communities while heat waves bake crops and fields. Agriculture, once France's pride, is struggling to survive. The result: food prices climbing even higher, adding fuel to an already raging fire. France has survived revolutions, wars, and crises, but can it survive this relentless storm? Or is the France we know about to become a memory? They promised democracy, they promised freedom, but what if those promises were just illusions? Poland, the rising star of Europe, is now teetering on the edge, and its people are furious. You won't believe what's happening behind the scenes. Poland's rapid economic rise once made it the darling of Europe, but today it feels like a house of cards. Here's the truth they don't want you to hear: democracy in Poland is under siege. The ruling Law and Justice PiS party has systematically weakened independent courts, reshaped media narratives, and pushed controversial reforms. But why does this matter to you? Because a crack in one democracy is a crack in all of them. Poland is showing us how fragile freedom can be. Judicial independence is fading fast. Judges who challenge the system face removal or harassment. The press, not free, as critics argue government-friendly outlets dominate the narrative, drowning dissent. Therefore, trust in the system is disintegrating, and when trust collapses, so does stability. At first glance, Poland's economy looks stable. GDP growth at 4.9% in 2023. Sounds great, right? But dig deeper and you'll find fractures threatening to split the foundation. Poland's reliance on exports to Europe ties its fate to slowing economies like Germany and France. Inflation, still biting hard at 10%, with basic goods becoming luxuries for many. And then there's the youth unemployment rate, a staggering 10%. But it's not just numbers, it's lives. A generation of young Poles feels abandoned, disillusioned, stuck in a system offering no future. This discontent, it fuels anger. Protests erupt weekly. Refugees fleeing the Ukraine war add strain to housing and resources, creating new layers of division. If politics weren't enough, Poland faces cultural fractures. Urban elites demand progress and openness, while rural areas cling tightly to conservative values. These divides are deepening. Therefore, the question remains, can Poland hold together, or are we watching a country pull itself apart? Poland fought too hard for its freedom to let it crumble now, but what happens next will shock you. Stay tuned for the next country on the brink. Ukraine, a land of resilience, beauty, and strength, is now a battlefield, not just against invaders, but against time, resources, and the limits of human endurance. But here's a question for you: can a country torn by war survive, or is Ukraine on the brink of becoming the world's next forgotten tragedy? Let's not mince words. Ukraine is fighting for its life. Bombs, bullets, and blockades are only half the story. The war has gutted its economy. Think about this: GDP plummeted by over 30% in 2022 alone. Factories reduced to rubble, fertile farmlands left barren, and entire industries wiped out. But here's the terrifying reality: rebuilding will cost hundreds of billions, and that's assuming the war ends anytime soon. What happens if it doesn't? Now let me ask you, how does a country rebuild when its people are scattered across the globe? Over 8 million Ukrainians fled as refugees, and many of them may never return. The brain drain is staggering. Doctors, engineers, teachers gone. Ukraine's public debt has soared to over 80% of GDP. You might think, well, can't international aid fix this? Sure, for now, but aid isn't infinite. The world's attention span is short. Therefore, the big question isn't whether Ukraine can get aid, but whether the aid will last before the world moves on to the next crisis. But here's what nobody's talking about: the emotional war. Families separated, children growing up in shelters, and a generation that knows nothing but conflict. How do you rebuild hope when the wounds are still bleeding? This isn't just about bombs, it's about trust, belonging, and identity. Ukraine isn't just fighting for land, it's fighting for its soul. Here's where it gets personal. Imagine waking up every day not knowing if your home still stands. Imagine seeing your children cry not for toys but for peace. What would you do? Would you keep fighting, or would you walk away? Let me ask you this: if the war drags on, if the debt piles higher, if the people lose faith, what happens to Ukraine? Will it rise from the ashes like a phoenix, or will it crumble under the weight of despair? And here's the hardest question of all: what would you do if this were your country? Ukraine's story isn't over yet. The world is watching, but will it act? Or will we all stand by and let history write another chapter of collapse? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and make sure to subscribe for the truth they won't show you elsewhere. What happens when a nation is caught between two worlds, neither belonging to the West nor finding solace in the East? Hungary's tale isn't just political or economic, it's a boiling cauldron of identity, betrayal, and desperation. This is a country walking a tightrope, and the fall could be catastrophic. On the surface, Hungary seems calm. Its picturesque cities and rich history draw millions of tourists each year. But beneath the postcard image lies a nation fighting to keep itself afloat. Its economy is a ticking time bomb. Let's break it down. Hungary relies heavily on its exports, particularly in automotive manufacturing. But as global supply chains crumble under geopolitical tensions, this pillar of the economy is starting to crack. The numbers are stark. GDP growth slowed to 1.5% in 2023, far below expectations. Add to this Hungary's crippling reliance on Russian energy. Therefore, when the European Union imposed sanctions on Russia, Hungary became the black sheep, refusing to sever ties with Moscow. This move may have kept the lights on for now, but it's alienated Hungary from its EU partners. Hungary isn't just at odds with the EU, it's at odds with itself. Prime Minister Viktor Orban's government has turned the country into a battleground of ideologies. His administration has been accused of dismantling democratic institutions, stifling press freedom, and tightening its grip on the judiciary. Imagine this: one half of the population clings to Orban's promises of sovereignty and stability, while the other half marches in the streets, shouting for freedom and reform. This divide isn't just political, it's personal. Families are torn apart, friendships fractured, communities broken. And then there's the brain drain. Over 200,000 skilled workers have left Hungary since 2018. Doctors, engineers, and IT specialists are fleeing to more stable EU nations, leaving the country hollowed out. But what does that mean for the future? A nation can't thrive when its best and brightest are gone. Hungary's inflation rate hit 14% in 2023, the highest in decades. Therefore, families are skipping meals, businesses are shuttering, and the once thriving middle class is disappearing. Meanwhile, EU funds, which could alleviate some of this pain, are being withheld over corruption concerns. This leaves Hungary teetering on the edge. Without economic stability or EU support, how long before the protests turn into something more? And here's the psychological dagger: Hungary's youth are losing faith, not just in their government, but in their future. When a generation grows up believing that hard work won't lead to success, what's left to hold on to? So here's the question: can Hungary claw its way back, or are we witnessing the slow death of a nation's soul? And if Hungary falls, what does that mean for the rest of Europe? Because history shows us one thing: instability spreads like wildfire. Hungary isn't just fighting for its future, it's fighting for its identity, and maybe, just maybe, for the identity of Europe itself. Are you watching closely? What do you call a country where the people are rich in resilience but the system bleeds them dry? Where history is both a source of pride and a chain that drags them down. This is Lebanon, a nation fighting to stay alive while the very fabric of its existence frays with every passing day. Let's start with the numbers, because numbers don't lie. Or do they? Lebanon's currency has lost over 90% of its value since 2019. Imagine waking up one day and your life savings are worth nothing. Bread costs more than gold, and the power to light your home is a luxury fewer can afford. But here's the kicker, this didn't happen overnight. Decades of corruption and mismanagement have drained Lebanon of its wealth. Its leaders siphoned billions from public funds while citizens were left to fight for scraps. And now, the people are paying for a debt they never agreed to. Electricity in Lebanon is a cruel joke. For most, it's available for only 2 hours a day, if they're lucky. Families crowd around candles, not for ambience, but for survival. Hospitals rely on aging generators to keep patients alive. Schools cancel classes because they can't even turn on the lights. Tell me this, how does a nation rebuild itself when its very infrastructure is crumbling beneath its feet? But electricity is just one piece of the puzzle. Fuel shortages, food scarcity, and an unemployment rate nearing 40% have plunged the country into a state of perpetual crisis. And as the world watches, Lebanon's leaders play a twisted game of blame and denial. And then there's Beirut, a city once called the Paris of the Middle East. Its streets tell a story of survival, but the scars are impossible to ignore. The 2020 port explosion devastated more than just buildings, it shattered trust, hope, and any illusion of safety. Over 200 lives were lost in an instant, and for what? A failure to act on decades-old warnings about explosive chemicals sitting unchecked. This wasn't an accident, it was negligence on a scale so massive it became criminal. Yet here's where Lebanon defies expectation. Amidst the chaos, the Lebanese people refuse to surrender. Artists still create, activists still march, teachers still teach under the most impossible conditions. Their resilience is unmatched, but how long can resilience hold against the weight of despair? This isn't just a Lebanese problem. It's a global question. When a nation loses faith in its system, where does it turn? Who steps in when hope itself is in exile? What if I told you there's a country where your thoughts aren't your own, where every smile could be a trap, every whisper a death sentence? This is North Korea, a place where freedom is just a word and fear is the language everyone understands. Imagine this, you wake up every day to praise a man whose face stares back at you from every wall, every coin, every book. You don't have a choice. In North Korea, adoration isn't optional, it's survival. Disrespect the regime even accidentally, and it's not just you who pays. Your family, your neighbors, and even your unborn grandchildren are punished. How do you live knowing your very existence belongs to someone else? The government scripts every part of life, from what you wear to what you think. There's no internet, no outside news, no unfiltered truth. But here's the cruelest part, many North Koreans don't even realize they're prisoners. To them, this nightmare is normal. Let's talk about hunger, the kind that doesn't just gnaw at your stomach but eats away at your soul. Famine has claimed millions of lives, but the leadership, they feast, lavish banquets, imported delicacies, while children score the dirt for food. What would you do if your government told you hunger is loyalty? That your suffering is a gift to the nation? And yet millions endure this hell. Why? Because hope, even the faintest spark of it, is a dangerous thing here. Escape means risking everything, your life, your family's lives, and even if you make it across the border, freedom doesn't always greet you. North Korea is a land of contradictions. A crumbling economy hides behind grandiose parades. Missile tests light up the skies while homes remain dark. The regime boasts power, but its people leave powerless. How does the world allow this to happen? How do we sleep knowing millions of lives are lived in chains just beyond our borders? But cracks are forming. Information is leaking in, smuggled on USB drives and radios. Whispers of another world, a freer one, are spreading. Every defector, every hidden voice, chips away at the walls of this oppressive fortress. Will the whispers grow louder, or will silence win again? North Korea's story isn't just about control, it's about the human spirit's fight against it. What would you risk to live free? The answer might haunt you. Once this land was a beacon of prosperity, oil flowed like rivers and wealth painted the streets gold. But now, Venezuela stands as a haunting tale of what happens when greed and power collide. Can you feel it? The tension of a nation on the brink, the echoes of shattered dreams. Once upon a time, Venezuela was the crown jewel of South America. It had the largest proven oil reserves on the planet. People came here chasing dreams, not running from nightmares. But then it all fell apart. Corruption crept into every crevice of power. Leaders made promises wrapped in lies, and when the oil prices dropped, so did the facade. The economy crumbled. Hyperinflation exploded. Overnight life savings became worthless. Imagine working your whole life only to wake up one morning and realize you can't even buy a loaf of bread. How do you keep going when hope is a luxury you can't afford? Picture this, people waiting in lines that stretch for miles only to find empty shelves at the end. Children rummage through trash for scraps of food. The average Venezuelan has lost over 20 pounds, not by choice but by starvation. How does it feel when hunger becomes your reality, when you're forced to choose between feeding your child or yourself? Yet, while the people starve, the elite live in luxury, throwing parties that cost more than an entire village's monthly ration. Speaking out is a death sentence. Protests are met with bullets and dissenters vanish without a trace. The government controls not just the media, but the very air of survival. They dangle basic necessities like food and medicine as weapons of obedience. Would you scream for justice if you knew no one could hear you? Or would you swallow your pride just to survive another day? But here's the twist, despite the darkness there's light. Underground movements are spreading. Smuggled goods, secret protests, whispers of rebellion, they refuse to be silenced. What keeps them fighting? What would keep you fighting if the odds seemed impossible? Venezuela is more than its tragedy. It's a testament to human resilience, to the refusal to give up. So, I ask you, when the world watches in silence, who will be their voice? Yemen, a name that barely makes headlines. But what if I told you it's the stage for the world's worst humanitarian crisis? What if I told you that silence, not bombs, is its deadliest weapon? Yemen's civil war has been raging for almost a decade, but let's be real, how often do you hear about it? The battle between the Houthi rebels and the Saudi-led coalition has torn this country apart, displacing millions and leaving a trail of devastation that spans generations. But here's the twist. This isn't just a Yemeni war. It's a global crime scene. It's fueled by international arms deals, foreign powers playing chess with human lives. Do you see the blood on their hands? Close your eyes. Picture a child crying, not for toys, not for attention, but for food. Now open your eyes and face this. Over 2.2 million children in Yemen are acutely malnourished. Parents are forced to make the impossible choice: who eats today, who survives another night. How would you feel if your love couldn't protect your child, if your arms couldn't shield them from hunger, disease, or the shrapnel tearing through your home? The blockade has turned Yemen into a prison. Supplies that could save lives are halted at ports while the black market thrives. A single loaf of bread can cost more than a week's salary if you're lucky enough to have one. Yemen doesn't just battle bullets. Cholera sweeps through the camps. Hospitals, already bombed to rubble, are overwhelmed with patients they can't save. Medicine is a luxury only the privileged can afford. And where is the world? Watching, waiting, doing nothing. Yet, amid the ashes, Yemenis resist. They hold on to hope like it's their final breath. Communities rally around the few remaining resources, turning scraps into lifelines. Journalists risk their lives to tell the stories no one else will. Why? Because their spirit refuses to be broken. But how long can that spirit last without the world's help? Yemen's tragedy isn't theirs alone, it's ours. Every moment of silence is a moment of complicity. So I ask you, will you keep scrolling, or will you choose to stand for humanity?